385 million, that's the number of children living in extreme poverty across the globe. Now, according to a report released jointly from the World Bank and UNICEF, 19.5% of children in developing countries are living in households that survive on an average of $1.90 a day or less per person. The study shows that sub-Saharan Africa has both the highest rates of children living in extreme poverty at just under 50% and the largest share of the world's extreme poor children at just over 50%, like I mentioned. Now, the first Sustainable Development Goal of the UN members is to end extreme poverty by 2030. That's 14 years from now. This is Joy News Interactive, and you're welcome to our special edition. I'll be joined later in the show by Susan Gongi. She's the country representative from UNICEF. But before she comes in, my colleague Justice Beidou is with me in the studio, and we'll be analyzing the report. We have some infographics to talk about this rather disturbing news.
Yeah, this is very disturbing, and if you look at the figures, they look really shocking. But then behind the figures, the question is, what does it really mean for ordinary Ghanaian children? Exactly. So we try to bring them down to the issues, the everyday issues on health, education, sanitation, nutrition, and what have you. So for example, what does this report mean for Ghana? We have around 12 million children overall in Ghana, and out of this, you could find that 60.1% out of these children use water from improved sources of drinking water.
So 40%
exactly. And so that is one of the figures, for example, that immediately comes out. We still have a maternal mortality ratio of 380 out of every 100,000 live births, which means that basically if 100,000 children are born, there should be a mortality of 380 people, which is still not good. Now, if you move on to education, so this is the general figures and how it looks. If you move on to education, which is saying, for example, that 7 out of 10 Ghanaian children in primary 3 can barely read or write. And so
7 out of 3, that's
and so if you take all Ghanaian children who are in class 3 and below, 7 out of every 10 basically cannot read or write, which is staggering. If you move on to sanitation, for example, which is the next issue that we've tried to break down here, 1 in 6 Ghanaians do not have toilets in their homes, which is 1 in 5 Ghanaians defecate in the open. One of the figures that we've also been thrown at is that it's going to take us, at the pace which we are, it's going to take us 500 years to be able to achieve the UN to make the whole country open defecation free. We still live in a country where children do not have a place to defecate. So that is one of the issues on sanitation as well. If you move on to nutrition, which is a key issue in terms of the well-being of children, 1 in every 5 Ghanaian children is stunted, which means that basically if you have children of the same age, 15 years for example, you could have 1 like this and 1 like that. So it means that children are not growing to the level that they are supposed to grow to, according to, if you look at the sort of ages that they have. If you move on from nutrition, one of the recommendations that this report has said for developing countries like Ghana, for example, is for government to increase social interventions like LEAP, like cash transfers that target the poorest of the poor. And in Ghana, we do know that one of these interventions has been the livelihood empowerment against poverty. Now, let's look at how the LEAP itself has done. LEAP has done incredibly great. It's now reaching close to 150,000 people. But what really is the question is that if you take 10 of the poorest of the poor, every 10 of the poorest of the poor people in Ghana at the moment, only 1 of such people is currently accessing the LEAP. And so the question is, what is happening to the rest of the 9? And so these are households who still need to be reached by social interventions that is trying to fight poverty. If you look at child poverty in itself, the staggering figure is that 3.5 million Ghanaian children are now described as poor. That is what this report means for us in Ghana. And so if you take every 3 Ghanaian children, 1 out of these 3 are children who are basically have issues with health, education, sanitation, nutrition, and all of that. And then if you look at the regional breakdown of child poverty, it also brings up issues of inequality as well. Exactly. For example, that children who live in the Upper West, for example, are sometimes more than 10, 20 times likely to be poorer than children living in the Greater Accra region. And so it is not fair. It doesn't promote inclusive development, and it goes to affect how the sort of future that we want to build for ourselves as a country. If you go into, and still on the things that affect children, issues like child marriage, for example, marriage is still an issue. Child labor is still an issue. It's there's staggering figures about children who are still being forced into early marriages. If you go into newborn health, newborn care, which is the issue around when children are born, the years, the critical years between the day of birth and their first birthday, or sometimes even the fifth birthday. The newborn care statistics that we do have from this report currently shows that in Ghana, 1 newborn dies every 15 minutes. That is really something every 15 minutes we are losing a newborn baby in this country.
So as we are talking now, in the next 15 minutes, that
exactly. And the last one, I'm going to wrap up this session. Of course, it's a huge report that details, but this is the very last on inequality, for example. Like I had said in the very first slide that came up, you would realize that, like I said, there's inequality in terms of where people are living. So your chances of being poor as a child depends on where you live in Ghana, whether you live in the Upper West region,
and obviously, which is no fault of the child.
Exactly.
You don't decide where you're going to be born.
And it's, in fact, sometimes it even depends on whether you are a boy or a girl. So there is also imbalance in whether the sort of attention that we are paying to children in terms of gender. So it has issues with gender-related activities that government is doing, or we are doing as parents or as civil society and everything. So yeah, this is a report that should cause a real sort of attention in the media, in government and civil society. We should all be concerned.
Thank you very much, Justice Baidu. That was my colleague, Justice Baidu, giving us some statistics on child poverty in Ghana. Now, we've just set the pace for the conversation, but would love you to join us via our social media platforms on Facebook. We are Joy News on TV. If you get onto Facebook, we've posted various comments. We have various posts on this particular issue. You can leave your comments in the comment section. You can also send me a WhatsApp on 0560-800-1000. You can also tweet at us at Joy News on TV. When I come back, country representative of UNICEF in Ghana, Susan Gongi, will be joining me here to answer all your questions. And we do have a lot of questions we want answers to. Please don't go away. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is the special edition of Joy News Interactive. We are talking about child poverty and all the rather interesting statistics that are coming up, especially in Ghana. And I've got Susan Gongi with me. She's country representative of UNICEF, and also our very own Francisca Kakrafos. And it's good to see you again. All right, and she's actually an influencer on education, and it's one of the many ways that the inequality gap can be bridged. But before we delve into the conversation, Susan, how long have you been in Ghana working with UNICEF, and what has the trend been?
I've been here for 3 years now. In terms of inequality, what we're finding is that it's growing. And we did not look specifically. It seems like we have known, but we've not been looking specifically. But now we've been doing some research at the global level, also in country, and we can tell that the gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Something interesting I just found out recently in terms of the consumption levels. If you pretended that the population of Ghana was 10 people, and you pretended that the economy was like a bowl of, I don't know, soup or jollof or something, one person will own about 33% of all of that. And one person at the bottom would own less than 2%. Can you imagine that? It's growing. It's the highest level that it has been in Ghana's history, from what we understand.
And do we know what some of the causes are? I mean, because we know that there's been a lot of interventions to try and bridge the gap and try and close the gap. But it's widening, as we're seeing with the statistics. What could
I think we need more interventions. I think part of the problem is we have not been looking specifically at what's happening with the poor. We've not been looking specifically at making sure that they are reached with interventions. And increasingly what we're learning now is we have not been looking specifically at childhood poverty, because there is an intergenerational nature of poverty, right? I am poor, therefore the children that I have are more likely to be poor, and therefore the children that they have are more likely to be poor, and it grows. And we've not been looking specifically at that. Of course, Ghana has done relatively well in terms of poverty reduction. It reached MDG 1, so it halved the poverty rates from 1990, from 52% or something like that, to 24 point something percent 2013. So that's excellent. But 24% is 1 in 4 people, so we cannot rest on our laurels. And also, the rate of poverty reduction was much faster earlier on than now. Now it's beginning to slow down, so we really have to be concerned. And the population is growing. So while we're reducing the percentages, in terms of the numbers of people that are poor, we have reduced it, but not that much. So the poverty reduction efforts are not keeping pace with population growth. So that forces us to start thinking a lot more creatively and focusing specifically at groups of people, making sure that they don't experience poverty.
And one of the many ways UNICEF is doing this is to encourage young people to learn, because it's one of the many ways you can help deal with poverty and in the long term bridge that gap.
Yes.
And Francisca, you've been working on this. You're an influencer. I saw the post on Facebook and I was happy about that. How has it been so far, and what has the response been?
Well, it's been an amazing experience to start with, because I've also worked, or I still work as a journalist, and you get closer to the facts, you get closer to the stories on the ground, working with UNICEF in this campaign of fighting child poverty. And the response has been amazing. I think we may be overwhelmed with the questions we're getting from just social media. People are asking how they can get on board. People are sharing their personal experiences. You get people going into their communities, taking pictures and saying, this is the situation. So all of this should come together as a voice to get everybody, all the stakeholders, especially government, working towards the goal.
So how do you go about your job? I'm just thinking, as an influencer, what's your job description like?
That's why I'm here. So yes, I'm in the business of talking, so I'm supposed to use my voice. And for those of you who know me, I'm quite opinionated and I talk a lot. So this is an issue that I personally have an interest in. So when I got the call from UNICEF, I was very excited, so ready to go on board. And what I'm doing is generating conversation on social media, being here talking about it, using my voice to get you to think about it, because the children are our future.
Exactly. And for those of you who may be wondering, why are we so concerned about child poverty? Well, like Susan mentioned earlier, when children are poor, it means that they grow up to be poor and they give birth to poor children. So what it means is that our future is not in a good position when you have the widening gap in poverty. Also, we posted on Facebook, and a lot of you have questions you want answered. Post the question to you too. But before we do that, apart from education, what are the other ways we can deal with child poverty?
Well, there are many ways. You know, in UNICEF, we look at child poverty as multidimensional. So there's the income, what household that they live in, how much that household is earning, that determines opportunities. There's education, as you mentioned. There's the quality of health care that they receive. There's the situation of water and sanitation that also impacts them adversely. There are all sorts of social harmful practices, for instance, child or forced marriage that they may experience. So it's all of these various dimensions that can get to curtail a child's potential, that they don't get to fully experience and grow up as they should, to have all the opportunities that they should have tomorrow, to not only take care of themselves, but also contribute to society.
All right, so this is from Bawa Huzumat, and you live in Accra, but you come from Wa, and you're saying that it's very true, the issue of child poverty, and she says she's a victim of that, and she had to, you know, become a head porter after school to bring income to her house. And it's interesting how sometimes the burden falls on the children to now support the home instead of, you know, the more responsible parents doing that. But she's saying that she was able to do it, and she's now pursuing her second degree. So for her, beyond you know, the education and beyond the other interventions that you mentioned, we should encourage children to be more innovative.
I totally agree with that, and that's a fantastic story. I'm so happy that she was able to escape the circumstances of her birth. That's what we all hope for. But along the line, I think what we're looking for is systematic ways where people can be helped. You know, in this story, you will always find that individual that triumphs over great adversity. But not everybody will triumph just on their own over great adversity. We should make it a little bit more predictable that you will be able to go through. And I agree with innovation. I mean, innovation, you have to constantly have to be thinking of new ways of doing things and better ways of doing things, etc.
All right, so on Facebook, Maxwell Hefu, he says there's no need to do politics with this story, and he's humbly asking the government and other corporate bodies to give a helping hand to these children in need. Gideon Eche says, surely, yes, children will be those highly affected, because they are the dependents, and since their parents can't make ends meet, it comes down to them. Muse Menes Iceberg says, yes, it's true, Ghanaian children are suffering. Prince Levin, okay, he's actually doing some partisan politics with it, but Mike Emeka Clayton says, wish to get better details than those vague numbers, and someone thinks this is ridiculous. Where in Ghana do we have such children? Now, on to the first comment about government and other corporate organizations helping in dealing with this problem. How has it been for you, you know, trying to work with government and other corporate bodies in dealing with this issue?
I think government is very interested in this issue. I mean, development of a nation and the citizens within that nation experiencing better life is one of the big jobs of government. So government is very interested in that, and there are many interesting programs. For instance, there are cash means where government is trying to help in terms of the cash transfer programs, but even all the various social services that government provides, you know, in education, health, etc. All of that is happening. Having said that, I think what we need is there are issues in some places. You started off with education, for instance. So the plus side is access has increased. Good. On the flip side, quality is going down. And of course, if you have the children in school and they're not learning what they're supposed to learn, they're not gaining the information they're supposed to gain, well, how is that going to be helpful, if you see what I mean? And for those sorts of things, it seems like we need a lot more accountability in the system. And to get more accountability in the system, to get better quality for some of these services, or to just increase them altogether, you need populations that are asking, that are demanding, that know the issues, that are able to discuss them, etc.
All right, so a lot more comments here. This is Joy News Interactive, and it's the special edition, so we are taking your comments on how to deal with the issue of child poverty here in Ghana. I've got Susan Ngogi, she's country representative of UNICEF, and Francisca Kakra-Forson. She's actually an influencer. She's trying to get young people to go to school and learn. And then, well, and I could see you nodding your head when she spoke about the quality of education as against accessibility. Do we just want people to go to school just because they have to go to school? And we know that a lot of children cannot read even in the third grade. So this one says the UNICEF report is really shocking and worrying, and you're saying government must set up to address this major concern because the children and the youth are the future of this country. This is from Akutu Breakthrough in Ho. And this one says, I will buy the view that the government or the researchers should educate the public when it comes to birth issues, the interval or birth rate, and the number of children each couple should have. When you look back in your village, a man died and he left 8 children. how can the woman take care of all these children? And this one says, the problem I have with these researchers, including the UNICEF one, is that they don't seem to prefer strategic and long-term solutions. They seem to be content with the news the researchers generate, and in the media and around the world, every research must produce results by law. This is Yakubu Ibn Chambers in Wale Wale. And this one is from Osman in Tamale. And you're saying, and he starts with the look, so you can see he's very serious about what he's saying. Child poverty in Ghana is increasing because of the kind of selfish leaders we have in Ghana. And, well, you think the NDC is doing that. And you're also asking, okay, he actually wants you, Susan, to listen to a lecture that we had some time ago, but I don't know why he wants you to listen to it. Probably relates to that. But let's talk about the research, because also some comments on Facebook. This is from Jake Frimpong, and he lives in Accra. He says he really admires the research, but he thinks it would have been more real if the survey was conducted in the rural communities where the issue was more prevalent, and he thinks that it would have been more factual. So a lot of people are raising issues about the research, how it was done, we can't trust it, and all that. How did you come by these figures?
That's a very legitimate question. So there are two things we're talking about here. The first one is that global research that was done by the World Bank and UNICEF that came with 385 million children in the world being poor. That was done using global data, of which Ghana was part of. But when we make statements such as, you know, children in Ghana are 40% more likely to be poor than adults, that 3.5 million children in Ghana are poor, that is based on data from Ghana. That information came from further analysis that was done on the Ghana Living Standards Survey that looked specifically at what was happening to children. And I think that's part of our problem in all of this is we have not been consistently at the global or national level been looking specifically at child poverty. We're sort of looking globally at poverty, but not specifically at child poverty. So in Ghana, for instance, we do know that poverty, in the depths of poverty are greater in rural areas, for instance. There are numbers for all of those things. And that is done using household data collected here in Ghana from very credible sources managed by the Ghana Statistical Service, etc.
All right, okay. So a lot more of your comments here on Joy News Interactive. And Roxon Dogbate, and he says this is a very nice program, and you think that all of us should come together to deal with this problem before it deals with us. Abelima S. lives in Aberdeen, Scotland, and you're saying this is such an excellent video on making a change in the lives of children. We actually posted a video on Facebook on dealing with child poverty, and he says no child should go through this. It's very heartbreaking. Some children are going through this, and she thinks it's so sad. I don't know if you were told about that story we brought from somewhere in the Ashanti region of Ghana, where a family had to share school uniforms. I mean, so the issue is that they want to go to school, but it's pretty embarrassing that two sisters have to share the same uniform, and because the shift system is run, one goes and comes back and gives the uniform to her younger sister, and that's what a lot of people are commenting on about on Facebook. But Amayal Deborah tweets, and he says a lot of Ghanaian children suffer from stunting. Could this be linked to poverty? And earlier, when Justice Beidou brought us that infographic on the statistics, we saw that a lot of children have stunted growth because they don't have access to the right nutritious meals they should have as children. And it's quite interesting how all these statistics come to play, and obviously the burden is on a lot of us, is on government, is on various stakeholders, and that's why we're having this conversation here. And Susan Gongi, she is country representative of UNICEF, and Francisca Kakra-Forson, she is an influencer trying to get people to go to school and learn hard. And have you had a one-on-one encounter with anybody in doing this job? Have you met anybody?
Well, I've had a lot of interaction with the UNICEF team, Ruth especially, and also Innocent, and the contact has been more verbal than in reality. The interesting thing that I gathered from all the research that I got from UNICEF, and I also did my own research, was that this is about the campaign I'm working with concerning education. that you cannot think about the economy without education. The economy must help education, because education will in the end come back to help the economy. So, and this is the education of children in Ghana. So we have to act now before it blows up in our faces, because we will be here. We may be in our 60s or whatever, but we'll be here when the children grow up and they don't have jobs, they don't have any skills, they live in poverty, and we'll have to deal with it.
Wow. I know even if we're not here, your children will be here.
Exactly.
So we're still
have to
here.
deal
You
with
have
it.
to deal with it.
Someone also spoke about controlling population. How about that? Because you're poor, you live in the village, you cannot take care of your children, yet you have 8 of them.
I don't think, a lot of times this is not an issue of controlling population, it's just making sure that the services are there. If you're a healthy man or woman and you wanted to manage your family, do you always have access to the services, the reproductive health services that you need to have, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a young woman? So you have to look at that aspect as well. If the services are not there that can help you actually manage your family, many people actually want to manage their families. Many people want to have the number of children that they can comfortably take care of. Many people don't want to have children and see them suffer, that they're not able to support their needs. In the world of today, everybody knows that, children cost some money. They have to go to school, you have to feed them, you have to give them health care, etc. So most people actually want to take care of their families. I would put it more, are the services there that people can have access to if they really wanted to manage their families?
All right, so this comment says that what we need is a new system and we need expert advice. But a lot of people say that for some people, no matter what you give them, they're just lazy. They cannot make anything good out of their life. So you still have poor people, not because the system has a problem. When we come back, we'll be discussing that. This is Joy News Interactive. Please don't go away. Thanks so much for staying on Joy News Interactive with me, Benis Abubedu. A special edition today, and we are talking about eradicating child poverty. We've been having this discussion for almost 30 minutes now, and it's getting interesting as you send me your comment via WhatsApp on the number 0560 800,000. I've been speaking to Susan Gongi. She's a country representative for UNICEF, and Francisca Kakra-Forson, who is, collaborating with UNICEF to help influence children to go to school and get an education. And that's one way of tackling or dealing with child poverty. But joining us from Tamale is Kantan Salifu, and he is a child's right advocate, and he is on the ground. So we can get some perspectives on what really is happening and how he, as a child rights activist, thinks that we can deal with the situation. Kantan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to join you.
How is Tamale?
Tamale is cool and green and very vibrant.
All right. Okay, so you live in the northern part of Ghana. Obviously, it's one of the areas that is considered to have high levels of poverty. As a child's rights activist, can you just give us briefly a picture of what is on the ground?
Well, thank you, and it's my pleasure to join you in this show. As you rightly mentioned, I was born and bred in the northern part of Ghana, and the discussions about child poverty is very apt, it's very real, because some of us have grown with it, we've seen it. But over the years, I think that whilst the nation as a whole has made significant progress in terms of economic development, but we still see that child poverty hasn't seen significant improvement, because you would realize that child poverty in itself is a societal problem. Here we're not talking about children who are failed to work and unable to fend for themselves, but here we are talking about children who are born to poor parents or poor households, and therefore by virtue of their birth, they are poor. And because of their situation, they are unable to realize, to actualize themselves. They are unable to have access to good education, good health, and are not given equal opportunities for development. So we see that in northern parts of the country, because of the high rates of poverty, invariably likely to have many more poor families, having more children, because if you look at the average household size in Ghana, you would realize that it's roughly between 6 to 7 when you look at most parts of northern Ghana. So when you have a poor household, it invariably tells you that you are going to have more poor children in that family or in that household. So that is why it is very accurate to say that about 40% of children are most likely to be poor compared to their adults, because it is adult households that have more poorer children. And if you look at the situation in the northern parts of Ghana, child poverty basically is more like a scar. Here you find children who are mostly clothes. They basically find it difficult to get a meal to eat. A lot of them who are even in school often so all of
well, we seem to be having some trouble with our lines over there, but we'll continue the conversation with Kanton. Kanton Salifu joined us from Tamale, and he's a child's rights activist. We are talking childhood poverty, but Susan, let's talk about the argument about behavior, the argument about it's poor. They just cannot fight for themselves. They are not pushing enough. Even if you if you give them everything they need, they still will not be able to get out of poverty, because it's a lifestyle issue.
Two things. I agree that behavior plays a huge part, and I'll talk about that briefly, but that there is some difference among us, I don't think is the problem here. What we're talking about is that there is equality in terms of opportunity. You know, if you have a population of however many million, we might have different interests, we might have different, different abilities, we might have different drives and all of those things. But if the access to opportunities was equal for all of us, you would have less of a gap. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about equality, everybody having the same thing, but everybody should have access to the same opportunity. And then let the differences fall where they may fall. But the point of behavior is a really important one, yes. I mean, a lot of development gains actually is going to be about behavior now. How people have been used to behaving in a particular way, doing things in a particular way, and that way is not working anymore. How to find new behaviors. Sanitation is a classic one. We're just not making nearly enough progress in sanitation. Only 15% of the population has a household toilet. A still significant number is defecating out in the open. It seems to be a norm in some places that people have gotten used to this is how we do it, etc. So changing people's behaviors that they actually don't want to do it out anymore, they really want to do it in a toilet, that takes some time, and it takes some, and also of course all the things are not in place for them to be able to have a toilet in their own home. But if the behavior changed, they would demand more for toilets in their own home, etc.
Now let's talk about some of the things that children are put through as a result of poverty. Talk about child labor, but particularly child marriage.
Yes.
About 1 in 4 children are married before the age of 18.
Yes.
And that is a very, 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 terrible situation for a young girl to even be forced.
It's disastrous.
Even if, let's just say, probably they were even interested, but largely we find out that many of them aren't interested. I read one story somewhere where the young girl was interested, but this is 1 in so many children. What are we doing to deal with the issue of child marriage?
Well, the legal age is 18. Clearly, in a lot of places, that legal bit is not being applied. But child marriage, I think, is both a norm and also a coping strategy. On the norm side, there are some parts of the country where it's, people in that community believe that a woman should start having children a little bit younger, should be married a little bit young, etc. And there, your question on behavior, how to help them realize that that is extremely unhelpful, both for the woman, for the family, and for all of us. But the coping strategy also is that sometimes, we mentioned reproductive health care earlier, a young girl might get pregnant. For the family to escape the shame,
they have to let you
get them married. Or it might be a poor household. Resources are scarce. Maybe they really want to secure the future of their daughter, so they marry her off. Or maybe they're anticipating the gifts of the future bride, so they marry her off. So it's a mix of both norm and coping strategy. And luckily the numbers are beginning to go down, but it cannot go fast enough. Because one thing we know in development is that while we're all equally valuable, women play a huge part in terms of helping to secure development outcomes for the nation. Why? Because a lot of the bearing and, well, all the bearing of children and the care, a lot of the caring of children falls on women. A lot of these girls who get married early on start having babies. Those babies fare less well. They themselves, a lot of times a teenager gets married, the body is not ready psychologically, they're not ready, etc. So the babies fare less well. But also they leave school, they tend to not remain in education, and that limits their future opportunities in terms of what kind of work they can have, how they can contribute to their families. It's all a whole host of issues. They have left maybe a little bit early. One of the biggest correlations in terms of child welfare is the education level of the mother. So child marriage really on many levels is something that we should fight.
Interesting conversations here. A lot of your messages on WhatsApp. Nanaya Nkumasi, he says, I believe poverty is a problem that, well, he thinks it cannot be solved until we change our perceptions that God takes care of kids and controls our birth rate by allowing government to formulate birth control policies. And he is saying, he's using China as an example, and he says for him, he thinks it's yielded excellent results. So why can't we? And this one says, as we talk about poverty, we should factor in birth control. If you visit the north, you see one woman giving birth to more than 8 children. Meanwhile, she may be the 4th wife. So imagine the other 3 wives producing the same number of children. Why wouldn't they be poor? A lot more of your comments here on Joy News Interactive. We take a quick break. When we come back, we'll tackle sanitation and wrap up the conversation. We'll be right back. Comments coming through. I'll just take a few of them now. And Dan Morgan says he's watching live in Italy. Peace be with you all. Okay, peace be with you too. And here, Dome Justice, he sighs and says it's a problem, but he says it's in tree and says it's very shocking that in the 21st century of a country, poor national service allowance as well. At least we could have gathered such allowances to start a business, okay? Nana Sabi says we need to do more to eradicate poverty. Enough of the talk shops. And Simon Kweku Bedu says our problems are man-made. People are suffering enough, but those enjoying do not see. And he says it's a pity. Now, this is a question to you. Many people are saying, well, you've come up with the statistics and you're telling us a lot of things, but what is UNICEF doing about this so that probably in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, when we conduct a survey like this again, the story will be better than it is now?
Several things. One is actually trying to help get the data that tells us what the problem is, because we did not see in very clear terms what is the problem of poverty with children. So UNICEF has been helping a lot with that. We work a lot with government and civil society. Another one is just getting that conversation going, being part of the discussions and making sure that more people talk about it, that the policymakers actually talk about it. In May, for instance, there was an inclusive development conference that we worked with National Development Planning Commission and others to get that conversation. And out of that, there were some policy recommendations that we hope will find their way to where they need to find their way, etc. And also UNICEF works with other branches in terms of supporting the various social sectors. We work with the health sector, we work with the education sector, we work with all these different sectors to help in terms of what are some of the policies that should be looked at if that policy framework doesn't exist. If it exists, what are some of the key programs that should be looked at? And supporting also in terms of finances that are transitioned through UNICEF from donor partners to support government.
All right, so for you who sent a message via WhatsApp asking the different strategies that UNICEF is using to deal with the situation, I hope your question has been answered. This says addressing child poverty by focusing on the kids. He thinks it's a misplaced target. If the parents are poor, so will the kids be. He says we need to decrease the birth rate, improve the standard of living of the average citizen via job creation. You say when the citizens are empowered, financially, they'll begin to demand better services like sanitation, accommodation, etc. And this one says 40% of kids in Ghana are poor. Do we have child rights laws in this modern Ghana? This is Amofa. You're sending this message from Germany. And, well, that will be it for our conversation today. It's been an interesting one here. Susan, any last words?
Yes, poverty is really tough on children. That person who said that it's misplaced, we should be focusing on job creation. Job creation is important, but poverty on children is very tough. It means their brains don't develop as it should develop, their bodies don't develop as it should develop. So if we don't take conscious action, whether your parents are poor or rich, that you as a child get access to certain key services so you can develop properly, it will be hard to break that intergenerational cycle of poverty.
All right, so like I mentioned, we are streaming live, and we are talking about eradicating childhood poverty. A lot of you are sending your comments. Actually, some of you are actually quoting Susan already. I can see one from Prince Living says, poverty curtails a child's potential, and he attributes it to you, Susan Gonji. And leaders have no proper ideas. That's one thing that Susan hopes that the conversation would bring up more ideas and solutions. And Prince Living again, Sheila Ven, she's sad, and she says, my opinion is that money should be set aside to target the most poorest people in our society. Also, she's asking, what do we use a tax for? I think these money should be used to help the poor people in society. She says, very disturbing statistics. And Apia Kubi Williams says, with all these messes, I think that's a true statement. Dawudu Adams lastly says, Libya takes most of our youth. Well, we know a lot of people are migrating because they do not see opportunities here, but that's all time will permit us on this special edition of Joy News Interactive. I had country representative of UNICEF, Susan Gonji, here with me, and also Francisca Kakra-Forson, who is an influencer on education. But the conversation continues on all our social media platforms, on Facebook, WhatsApp. We are Joy News on TV on Facebook and on WhatsApp. Our number is 0560800000. You can also tweet at us at Joy News on TV. Let's continue the conversation with hashtag Fight Child Poverty. My name is Bernice Abubedu. Many thanks for your company.